Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by somebody in the business community that I really admire, Dr. Patrick Murphy from University of Alabama, Birmingham. He is the professor and chair of the Entrepreneurship program, which, congratulations, I understand that you all just received the Top Emerging Program Award from the U.S. Association for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. In addition to your role at UAB, you're also an author of the book Mutiny and Its Bounty, as well as a model of social entrepreneurship, which received an award or a designation as the 6 most influential papers on social entrepreneurship. So first and foremost, Dr. Murphy, thank you for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the very kind introduction.
I did the best I could. So one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on, Dr. Murphy, is this concept of the entrepreneurial mindset. I know it's one of the core courses of your curriculum, and inspired by a pretty interesting source, the Portuguese and Spanish seafaring cultures, which is the basis of one of your books. So was curious how you think about or would define the entrepreneurial mindset, and how did you create that link between the seafarers of the age of discovery and entrepreneurship?
I think people like Steve Jobs have a lot in common with Ferdinand Magellan, or Elon Musk probably has a lot in common with Christopher Columbus or John Cabot, and a lot of the explorers that you alluded to. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I think it's almost like a timeless impulse for one individual or a group of individuals to try to achieve something that feels like it's beyond their boundaries. And it's a force of human nature, irrespective of time or place when this happens. There's certain commonalities across all of these boundaries and barriers. So for us, the way we define the entrepreneurial mindset has a lot to do with reframing certain paradigms, certain ways of thinking about work and data. A lot of these come out of the industrial organizational paradigm, which was born of the Industrial Revolution and gave birth to something that we all know as bureaucracy. But if you go back in time, and this is what got me into the seafarers, to maybe 600 years ago, before we had industrial organizations, the work that was being done primarily with the Portuguese seafarers, but also with Spain and France and England, is very similar to what entrepreneurs do today. And so they had to define their worlds quite differently and ignore certain things that we've come to take for granted with the industrial organizational paradigm that don't really apply if you're not working in a large company and are trying to start something brand new and engage uncertainty. So we target all of those things and really try to reframe the way people think about those huge challenges.
Yeah, there does seem something to be very ornate to the process of discovery or creation. When you were saying that, I think about Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, the framework that was used by people like George Lucas of Star Wars, and Harry Potter follows it, Lord of the Rings, but also Theodore Roosevelt's Man in the Arena speech.
Mm-hmm.
There's something
absolutely
bold and brave about going out into the unknown, whether it's in seafaring or in the entrepreneurial realm.
Yeah, and it's easier for any person to do that if they have certain things in accompanying them or empowering them. For example, just a strong sense of purpose and values. Like if you really believe in whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, and I mean believe it to the extent that you'd be willing to make sacrifices for it. Like think of a loved one or a pet, or maybe your culture or your religion or anything that's deeply connected to who you are. That these are the kinds of things that tend to bring out the best and the worst of human nature. It's very powerful. And so whether it's seafarers way back when, or a lot of the hero's journey, that archetype for explaining fictional stories, or entrepreneurs today who believe strongly in what they want to achieve, the same phenomenon takes place. And that's one of the components of the entrepreneurial mindset that we spend a lot of time talking about and trying to instill in the learners who are in our program.
Yeah. When I thought and read Mutiny and Its Bounty, a couple things stood out. One, there's so much information through the log books, and these people were in constant communication with each other. Working at a startup myself now, there's a lot of talk. Change is very uncertain. So sometimes people feel a little insecure, or there's a conflict of motives, especially in these days when they're navigating five ships. When you dug into this, what similarities did you see between entrepreneurship and on a more tactical basis? We talk about the logbooks, navigating uncertainty, building a culture. What else stood out to you?
There are a lot of parallels, and it's related to that kind of essential archetype, whether it's hero's journey or the historic examples that we mentioned earlier. I think the first one is uncertainty has a certain kind of infinity around it. There are no limits, there's no range. Uncertainty is wholly ill-defined. So earlier when I compared Steve Jobs or Elon Musk to seafarers of hundreds of years ago, think about what Elon Musk is trying to do with SpaceX, for
Yeah.
example, or whether it's Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin. And now go back and look at somebody like John or his son Sebastian Cabot or Ferdinand Magellan or Columbus or these different seafarers. They viewed the ocean very similarly to how these space entrepreneurs, these entrepreneurial ventures that are looking to Mars and things like that. They looked at the ocean back then almost exactly the same way we look at outer space right now and going to Mars. So all of the level of uncertainty around that type of stuff and then turning uncertainty into risk when you're already underway on the journey, and all of that becomes the art form of leadership and the style of entrepreneurial leadership in these contexts. There's a lot of other parallels too. Of course, you not only are the failure rates high back then like they are today, you also have to raise money. Like today it might be talking to a bank or a venture capital firm or an angel fund or whatnot, but back then they had to pitch to the royal court, and a lot of the pitches were rejected. And there's just so many parallels between the two things. And so what was most interesting to me, this idea to put the book together, occurred to me when I was still in the city of Chicago and working with a lot of entrepreneurs back there. But I saw an incredible number, an incredible proportion of the entrepreneurial ventures we were working with had what were essentially mutinies within the team. And it really started to happen once they grew and started to make progress and evolve and change. And the criteria for fitness evolved, and therefore the leader who started it wasn't the best one to be leading it, a few years later. And it led to these kinds of frictions. But I thought, wow, these are social and intellectual mutinies. They're not like physical, violent mutinies like the ones 600 years ago, but there's got to be certain commonalities between the two settings. And so in the book, with the research, getting into the logbooks, like you mentioned, there was such a culture of measurement on the ships and the note taking and the logbooks and all that. Everything is recorded, and now they're digitized and translated and searchable. So you can do incredible research on these things. And that was the whole impetus for the book, to pull out these lessons and apply them to contexts, entrepreneurial contexts today.
I want to dig into the concept of mutiny a little more. It's not a word that gets a lot of use today. But, when I was reading the book, I kind of developed a new relationship or a new awareness to the mutinies that happen in our world or in our companies. Could you speak more to how you define mutiny and some examples that you might have seen while working with entrepreneurs over the years?
Yeah, it's not enough just to have one person do it. First of all, this is part of the definition. You need to have more than one person.
I'm sure
Therefore, it has to be.
Some seafarers probably found that out the hard way.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So having multiple people together with a shared purpose for deposing or removing the leadership structure that they're subject to. And now this is deep, Adam. This goes way back. It's almost biblical. Like even Adam and Eve, when they united against, the serpent in the garden, or the devil and God and all of that, there's the same kind of impulse there. There are many, like George Lucas and Star Wars, you mentioned, like going against the powerful structure and trying to overturn it. It's a David and Goliath story. It's something that's been there throughout human history. But when we get into entrepreneurial ventures of today, it becomes super interesting. Even in the 1950s, a lot of people don't know this, but the history of Silicon Valley can be traced back to a mutiny that occurred at Shockley Semiconductor in the late 1950s. And that led to this kind of spawning effect and abundance of the people who mutinied, and it kind of fell apart. But people went on to found companies that turned into what Oracle is today and other sorts of ventures like that. So there's an abundance mentality connected with the coordinated upward defiance of authority that is very much germane to the entrepreneurial act of today. And there's so many examples. Like there's actually a very good book. It was about 8 years ago or so, called Hatching Twitter, about how where Twitter came from and whatnot. And there were at least 3 mutinies as they were coming up, like Noah Glass, and who actually, he used to tweet out that he invented Twitter. And then there was another, I'm blanking on the names now, but there were a lot of these kinds of things that occurred. Of course, Steve Jobs being removed from the board, Apple, what happened there? It happens again and again when you look at entrepreneurial settings. And so I was very interested in making sense out of this. So just one final comment on how interesting it is. You can think of a mutiny, which it must involve more than one person, within the context of a larger authority structure, as being very much like a startup venture, which frequently likes to redefine what's going on or flip the script on the way things are done. And as a result of that, it flips traditional management on its head. So for example, you and probably everybody listening is familiar, like in every MBA classroom, when you learn strategic management, you learn about what used to be called external analysis, and that turned into what's called SWOT analysis, with strengths and weaknesses being internal to the organization and opportunities and threats being external. Well, the matrix of opportunities and threats for that larger organization is transposed for a mutiny within that organization. In other words, the threats to the larger organization can actually be transformed into opportunities for mutiny operating within that organization and leveraged against the larger organization. So it gets very interesting, and you can very much align it with the organizations of today, and it helps entrepreneurs strategize, because they usually are offering a new way of doing things that will run into friction with larger structures.
Yeah. It almost challenges the concept of strategy in a way. Like, when you think about the seafarers and going out into the unknown, similar to an entrepreneurial venture, the captains have a pretty good idea of what's out there, maybe not, but they still have to manage expectations along the way. I think about like trying to shoot through a strait or having to go through an entire continent, or venturing into waters where there might be a native people who are aggressive. How does this work around the age of discovery challenge sometimes modern concepts of strategy, that it's, somebody with a vision and it just happens?
So back then, a mutiny was as natural as the wind on a seafaring venture. It was a natural force of human nature, and it was part of leadership to being able to deal with a mutiny was part of being a leader. It wasn't even fully regarded as a bad thing per se, because it was so natural to the activity of undertaking a venture in an environment that's laden with uncertainty. The negative definition and the negative connotation with this word mutiny, which almost seems to come with its own exclamation point, came out of the Industrial Revolution, when you started to see levels of authority and the division of labor, which are the two principles that define the bureaucracy. And when you put something like a coordinated upward defiance of authority, which is what a mutiny is, into a bureaucratic structure, it is truly hostile to the dominant logic of that reality.
Yeah.
It is very hostile to the way it is set up to work. And so that is what led to it being a negative thing. And Sebastian Cabot, he was a seafarer around the time, probably decades before the real industrial growth of England wanted to take place. He was a seafarer in England very early in his life and very late in his life. And he wrote a lot about how mutiny was bad. And he had founded a couple of organizations, seafaring organizations in England, like the Company of Merchant Adventurers and so forth. And then I think as commerce, England had a very commerce-driven empire, and it came with all the bureaucracies and structures and whatnot that we think of today. I think that is when the mutiny concept became much more of a negative connotation. But if you go about 200 or 300 years before that and look at Portuguese seafaring, and about 100 years after that, Spanish seafaring, you tended to see it as something that leaders needed to know how to use for the betterment of their enterprises. So that goes even beyond thinking of it as not such a bad thing. Leaders were so skillful, they were able to capture the energy of a mutiny and use it to assist in the performance of a venture. And so, of course, Christopher Columbus is a great example of that. Right around October 7th or 8th, 1492, he dealt with the mutiny, which emerged, and he knew it was going to emerge. And part of the problem here was that he was keeping misleading logbooks, almost like an unethical accountant of today might do. And the crew became more and more suspect because he was underreporting how far they actually were from home. And the farther away you get, the more the anxiety goes up. And they suddenly, it grew and it developed to a head where it just snapped. And they said, okay, that's it. You turn around or we're taking control of this venture. But he was waiting for that. And he said, his response was, okay, fine, I agree with you, but give me 3 more days. If we don't sight land in 3 more days, we will turn around. And they said, no, 1 more day. And he said, okay, 2 more days. And they agreed. And then at that moment, there was a great release of tension. And the work that was being done was more spirited and honest than ever before, because now they had certainty. He transformed uncertainty into risk at that point. And they knew when they would be going home. And therefore, that was the final push that got them over the line, because they did, in fact, sight land within 1 day. The next morning, they spotted it. And, the difference between success and failure can be just that much anyway. It can be just 1 day out of 6 months. And so he used the power of mutiny to get it over the finish line. And it's a very interesting case of, I think, how entrepreneurial leaders ought to regard that construct today.
Yeah. One other construct I would love to get your opinion on, particularly in the academic realm, is educating students on the concept of the marketplace. I want to reflect on my academic career in my first 9 or 10 years in the working world. There would have been, I don't know what professors could have said to prepare me for the competitiveness of the business world. So I was wondering how you think about that, and then how you attempt to translate that and help that click for your students.
That's a great question. So in entrepreneurship education, which is where I do my work, we focus on the individual person. So every single person is unique, obviously, in terms of the value system that they have, the value systems that they have. They can have different sets of values based on different parts of their person, their personality. And these are things that don't really change this much. They're pretty enduring and they're pretty stable. What makes you who you are and how you like to engage the world is a very important part of our unique identity. And so we spend a lot of time reinforcing the fact that that's important, because who you are and what you believe in will dictate what you do when you enter a realm of radical uncertainty. If you're in a dangerous situation or there's a threat situation that's serious and the consequences matter, that's when people tend to resort to who they truly are. And by teaching this and getting people, entrepreneurs and future entrepreneurs, to truly get in touch with who they are, they lead with that and they enter situations by playing to their own strengths. And that lends their decisions and their actions a certain kind of authenticity and boldness, which is really important to just feeling confident enough to challenge the world or to challenge a structure that's larger than yourself. You will be brave enough to take action that way and embrace uncertainty if you truly believe in what you're doing. So a lot of the challenge of engaging in an uncertain world is embracing the certainty of who you are.
Yeah.
And the key to dealing with change is a changeless sense of who you are, which is almost somewhat ironic. The key to dealing with change is a changeless sense of who you are. So we start within, and I think universities are really the only places where we can teach that kind of stuff effectively, because it's just the nature of a proper university education. So we start with that. And then as the students become, all of their potential is already within them if you look at it that way. And a lot of philosophers, myself included, believe that everything that you're ever really going to truly learn is already inside you. You just need the environment to unlock it for you. I mean, that's really the heart of the Socratic method. That's why they ask questions, because the answer, it's already within you. You just need the right questions to bring it out. So we spend a lot of time on that. And I think that once a learner really truly gets that, they get a kind of confidence that's important to them, but perhaps more importantly, they take on a learning orientation and they work really hard to discover who they are. But of course, that's how they learn what the world is around them and how they identify opportunities for them to grow and make impact.
Bravo. You've been really gracious for your time, but before I let you go, a couple questions. Are there any trends you're watching in entrepreneurship right now?
A lot of this is highly localized, like different ecosystems have different trends within them. But when I think about our ecosystem here, there's a lot of growth in our ecosystem here in Birmingham, and there's a lot of becoming, kind of like we were just talking about. But for me, I'm very interested in very new and progressive and bold, avant-garde, more informal approaches to venture finance. Like a really developed and mature angel investing sector, I think, is on the horizon here
in Birmingham.
In Birmingham, in our particular ecosystem. And what I mean by that is, I mean, we've had angel investors. There's individual angel investors all over this place. But what I'm talking about is a little bit more coordinated angel groups that do smaller deals that VC firms or banks wouldn't care about because it doesn't fit their parameters and their limits and their structures. But groups of angels that work together in a coordinated way to make decisions and have much more of a relationship building process with the entrepreneurs with whom they support. So I think angel groups and angel investing here is a big trend. I mean, more broadly speaking, obviously, right? So two things, the big trend, the big global trend for me, and the one that's most exciting, would be the exploration of outer space. I think the notion of going to Mars or engaging the undiscovered country that's out there is a big one. That's a very exciting trend, and I think we're going to see more and more people get into that over the next century, and it's huge. And then finally, of course, the digital currencies and the blockchain and all of that. And I think just what excites me about that, just to wrap up this answer, is that people must realize that as technology evolves, it becomes more social. I think everybody knows that anyway, but we really need to think about that. So I think it creates a space for social enterprise. Tech ventures and social ventures, I believe, within 20 or 30 years are going to be the same thing. There's going to be no difference between them.
Yeah.
In fact, all entrepreneurship may even become socially purposeful entrepreneurship eventually, as we exit this industrial organizational paradigm and move into this realm where technology empowers diverse individuals to do all kinds of different things. And if they're acting from their sense of purpose, it's going to be almost geared for socially purposeful entrepreneurship. So these are the kinds of trends that I'm watching.
Yeah, I'll be watching them as well. For our listeners, any news outlets, books, etc., on topics and trends on entrepreneurship that you'd recommend?
Topics and trends. So I'm not big on trends, Adam. I mean, I respect them and I read about them, but in my role as a scholar and as an endowed chair, it's really important that we put stuff out that lasts for like 20 or 30 years, and trends kind of come and go. However, it would be foolish of me not to keep track of trends. And my personal go-to place for things that are happening right now that are hot, I get the Strictly VC email, which people may or may not have heard of that. It's called Strictly VC. Mm-hmm. They're out of California, and they report on a lot of the deals that are being done and things that are happening in the startup world. And I think they do an excellent job of providing links to references and things that are going on. It's an extremely successful newsletter. They have sponsors and everything else, and you can put ads in there. But I read that every single day. I also read the subsection of Google News for Entrepreneurship every single morning. I probably spend at least 2 hours reading these sources and sources connected to them every single morning. And that's how I stay on top of what's happening in the entrepreneurial world. As far as topics, I can get a little bit more academic about this, but for me, I go to Google Scholar which if you're an academic or a professor, you know about this. If you're not, you may not have heard about that, but it tracks academic publications, and you can see how frequently you've been cited and things like that. I mean, I can see pretty much everybody who cited my work over all of my publications, and thousands of scholars and papers all over the world. But within that Google Scholar, you can search for topic area. And so I look at a lot of social enterprise, I look at a lot of history, and I look at the publications that are coming out in the academic journals. I find that kind of reading much more satisfying for me because it's what I'm into, but I'm following Google Scholar quite a bit. And then if you want me to, do you want me to mention a couple of books that really moved me over the years? Just real quick. So again, these are not like current books per se, but there's one book in particular that I would advise any entrepreneur to read, and I love it. And it's been out for a long time now, probably, almost a decade, if not a decade. Benoit Mandelbrot was a Sterling professor at Yale, and he created what's called fractal geometry. But a lot of people may have heard of fractals and seen the distribution and what it looks like, and its self-similarity, and they relate it to nature and everything. And that he wrote a great book with another guy called Misbehavior of Markets, and he essentially attacks what we call in academia the general linear model, which a lot of people know as the bell-shaped curve or the Gaussian-shaped distribution, the normal curve, which we use to infer population characteristics based on a sample. He turns all of that on its head. He essentially wads it up and throws it out and looks at a totally different approach to visually depict data and make forecasts about the future, which are not predictions. You're kind of predicting what won't work and narrowing the limits around what may work. And I really like the way that he writes about that, and he goes after the capital asset pricing model in very intelligent ways. But for an entrepreneur, I think you have to have that kind of worldview to really be able to manage growth. Another one, just really quick, this is a very old book, and it's sort of out there and gone, and people have forgot about it, but man, did Kevin Kelly do a good job on this. New Rules for the New Economy. It's an unfortunately topical sounding title because it was sort of like .com buzzy sort of thing, but Penguin, I think, republished it, and it's a short book. And Kevin Kelly is a real futurist. I mean, he's legit. He works with the Long Now Foundation out in San Francisco, and he's written other things since then, but he wrote that book, New Rules for the New Economy. He has chapters in there they have titles such as Opportunity Before Efficiency. And he talks about, you'll see Google do these things where they'll launch these different products and they won't work and they'll fail and they'll keep failing. And to the people who lead Google, they believe that's good because it shows that you're trying things that don't work, and it generates inefficiency, but it also leads more toward effectiveness. So those are two books I would read. And then, as I mentioned, the Google News and the Strictly VC and the Google Scholar. That's where I put a lot of my attention into.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to include some of those in the show notes. Again, Dr. Murphy, thank you so much for joining us today, and congrats on all your recent success.
My pleasure. And thank you. And congrats to all of your success. I think you're a great entrepreneur. We're keeping a really close eye on you guys, and we're inspired by everything that you're doing. And I really enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Go Blazers. Thanks, Dr. Murphy.